Well, he didn't answer.
I know.
Well, I'm not sure what the question was.
I was waiting for the question.
Yeah, what's,
You do.
all right. We have a song, I'm sure some others of you use it in your churches too at times, and it's called In the Eye of the Storm. You remain in control, and in the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor. When my sails are torn, your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. So here is a man before us today who grew up with a vision of protecting people in the eye of the storm. And I'm sure you're going to talk more about that today. John has over 20 years of forecasting experience. For those who don't know, he's on Local 12, which is the only channel I can't get on my digital antenna. I know, please. He said I have to put one on top of my house. Well, I'm John, I'm not crawling up there to put one on. Anyway, let me give you a little bit of his background. He's been all over the country. All kinds of weather has been experienced in the places like in Rock Island, Illinois, outside of Chicago, in Newborn, North Carolina, another coastline where he had to deal with a few hurricanes there. And then in New Orleans, Louisiana, he's won a lot of awards for his work, including the Associated Press Award for the best weathercast in Louisiana. His interest started at a young age. He was in the 6th grade at Brantner Elementary in Mount Carmel. He was given the assignment in class to write about his greatest dream in life, and John shared the details of a childhood aspiration, describing how he wanted to become a meteorologist and someday help to save millions of people from a horrible hurricane. Little did he know that many years later, that dream would become a reality. In August of 2005, he experienced weather forecasting under incredibly challenging personal circumstances. Working for WWL in New Orleans, he reported live for 12 straight hours, warning viewers about Hurricane Katrina. And it wasn't until after he went off the air that he was able to finally evacuate his wife and his newborn son. And following that broadcast, John got a lot of letters and emails from people whom he helped to convince to leave the city. He is a graduate of Glen Estey High School, no longer in existence. It's now called what? West Claremont High School. He went to study weather at a good Lutheran university in Valparaiso, Indiana, known as Valparaiso University, where he got his BS in meteorology. A BS. That's a lot of your forecast is, no, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So he got that degree. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. It was there on the page. He helped create one of the largest storm chasing groups in the country while he was in college. He is certified broadcast meteorologist, which is a CBM, an accreditation awarded by the AMS. The CBM is supersedes the AMS seal of approval and requires successful completion of very comprehensive examination on theoretical meteorology, operational meteorology, forecasting, and general science. And when he's not speaking, forecasting, he is speaking to area school children about the weather, spending time with his family, mountain biking, hiking, swimming, tinkering with electronics, especially computers, and he loves following the Reds. Real disappointing year, isn't it? Yeah. And the Bengals, great year, and FC Cincinnati, we're halfway there. And in his spare time, he also loves to dabble in developing apps. So are those weather apps? Okay. And so it's my pleasure to introduce to you John Gumm from Channel 12.
I asked him to do the Reader's Digest version of it. I'm not sure that was quite, you cut it down. Cut it down. Thank you for having me out here today. I've been a resident of Boone County now for almost 17 years. So straight from New Orleans to here in Boone County, quite a difference. let's just say I like it here a lot better down there, to say the least. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'll be preaching to the choir, because as members of the Rotary, you guys embody a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about today. And I think you'll connect with a lot of it. When Don asked me to do this, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to fit in my schedule. But when he mentioned there was food involved, I was all in. That was some good stuff. So thank you for lunch today, guys. When I came back here to the Cincinnati area, one of the things you miss all the time when being away from the place you grew up is the food. And that's one of the things that I really missed when I was away. So when you graduate college and you start your career, and what I do, you don't start in Cincinnati. That just doesn't happen. You go away to tiny places and you basically earn your stripes. So when you're away, you kind of miss that food. I missed all the big time favorites here in Cincinnati, the Montgomery Inn. I missed the Frisch's. I missed the Skyline Chili. That was all big time stuff. I think one of the greatest days of my life, next to my children being born, was when I was working in New Bern, North Carolina. It's a little coastal community there. When the local Harris Teeter got Skyline in their freezer case. That was a fantastic day for me. And I had another fellow I worked with who was from the greater Cincinnati area there at that particular station. And like, he called me right away. He's like, hey, head to Harris Teeter, get as much of it as you can. And I went over and bought it all, and him and I split it. So that was a great day, but you miss that stuff. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey on to where I am right now, and some of the lessons that I learned along the way during this journey. I haven't given this talk for a long, long time, so it's been a while, so bear with me. I hope you find a little of this useful or at least interesting. But the whole story here as it progresses is something that is not going to go chronologically. So I'm going to start in the middle of this story, something that Pastor Blair had just alluded to. Saturday, August 27, 2005, I woke up that day with a really sick feeling in my stomach. I was working in New Orleans, and we had a hurricane coming our way. And every time that happened, that meant I was going to go to work and stay there for several days. So you had to pack clothes to last several days. You had to make sure you had all your stuff. You didn't know when you were going to see your family again. That's just how it went. It's how the whole lead up to a hurricane is in those particular coastal areas. New Orleans is not a city you want to be in when a hurricane hits. The city sits below sea level. So imagine filling your kitchen sink with water and taking a cereal bowl and sticking that bowl down into the water just to the point of where it starts to fill up with water. That's New Orleans. Okay, the whole bottom of the city sits below sea level. You got water above it. To the south, the Gulf of Mexico, to the north, Lake Pontchartrain. Even the Mississippi River now is above the city of New Orleans. So that makes it one of the world's most vulnerable cities to hurricanes. Every single drop of rain that falls into that city needs to be pumped out. They have these giant pumps that basically make the city inhabitable. If it wasn't for those pumps, the city really would be much smaller. It would just be on the ridge of the river where the French Quarter is, and that would be it. The rest of it would be swamp. It wouldn't be able to be developed. But every drop of water has to be pumped out of that city. And basically, they use a series of underground canals and above ground canals that are connected to those pumps to get the water out of the city. So everything drains into those canals. It's not natural like it is around here. We have gravity drainage. And then those pumps go ahead and pump the water out of the city. These pumps can move more water than the entire flow of the Ohio River. So we're talking about a massive engineering effort that allows the city to exist. There are two problems, though, that present itself as a hurricane comes into the city. Number one, hurricanes push water. And number two, you get tremendous amounts of rainfall from these hurricanes. As soon as your rainfall rate in New Orleans exceeds 1 inch per hour, and we do that here easily now with summertime and spring thunderstorms, and we're going to do that today in some spots. But as soon as that rainfall rate exceeds an inch per hour, if you're in the city of New Orleans, water begins coming up out of the storm sewers. The streets begin to flood because the pumps cannot keep up with that flow of water. That's just how it is. So it's one of those situations where the city is extremely vulnerable to this type of situation with a major hurricane coming in. So my anxiety on that morning of August 27th was warranted. Nonetheless, I had a job to do. When I went to the station that morning, I began to analyze the mountains of data coming in. And in a nutshell there, it obviously didn't look good. It was pretty straightforward that this hurricane was going to come up very close to the city of New Orleans. And one of the problems we had is that those same numerical models were also predicting intensive rapid increase in the wind speeds and a drop in the pressure of this hurricane. So this hurricane itself was going to become a monster, basically, as it crossed what we call the Gulf Loop current there, which is just like high octane fuel for a hurricane. It's warm bath water there. And so I was a little nervous, to say the least, at this point. Every piece of data I looked at was predicting a worst case scenario for the city. The National Hurricane Center was backing up what I was seeing. At the stroke of 9 a.m., it was my job to go on TV and deliver the worst possible news that you could deliver to anyone. And delivering that news was just part of my job that day. You see, hurricanes had approached New Orleans over the years, many powerful hurricanes, and they had turned at the last minute, not hitting the city. You had an entire generation of people and their children who had never seen a major hurricane hit that city. So it was not something they had experienced in an entire generation, almost a generation and a half at this point. So it was my job not only to inform, but it was my job to convince them that this was really going to happen, because every single one had turned away. So the first lesson that I have here that I want to talk about is, how do you deliver that type of bad news to a customer? Because the viewers of the TV station are my customers. How do you do that? Well, everyone that watches the news is definitely my customer. And so the question went through my head ahead of time: what do I do in this situation? And the answer I came up with was pretty simple. I had to put myself in their shoes. You know, what if I were sitting there at home? What if I were listening to this? How would I react? So, number one, with this entire thing, I was completely honest. I told them what I knew, exactly what I knew. And I told them, more importantly, what we didn't know at this time about what was going to happen with this hurricane. We never sugarcoated things. I was empathetic to what I believe their feelings were going to be. I understood that their feelings could run the full gamut here, from disbelief to shock to anger to even fear. And I think it was important for me to realize that and not just be robotic in how I was giving information. And this is something I even addressed when I was on the air during this time. I was clear, I was calm, and I was direct with them. I didn't use fancy scientific terms or talk over their heads. I had to maintain a calm demeanor and made sure I used simple language to communicate this clear and concise message to them. And finally, and I think most importantly, I offered a solution to this problem. You had to evacuate. You had to. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This was probably not the solution people wanted to hear, but it was the only reasonable solution to the problem at hand. So I continued to broadcast for 12 hours straight, delivering the same message, passing along new information. And it was just after 9:30 when I received a call that would change everything for me. I'm going to the hospital. I think I'm in labor. Must have forgotten to mention, my wife was 9 months pregnant when all this went down. So again, you understand the extra anxiety that was involved in this whole thing. I remember the very first time that I ever thought about weather. And it's one of those defining moments. And I was probably in preschool at this time. We were living out in Anderson Township on the eastern side of Cincinnati there. And I remember these gigantic clouds were billowing up on the horizon. And I was with my grandfather. And I thought, that is so cool. What are those? And he's like, those are thunderheads, JB. Called me JB. And so that was a defining moment for me when I first thought, wow, the weather is cool. And it wouldn't be long before I started thinking a little more about weather. About the age of 6, I was playing with my older cousin, Donnie. Donnie was about 10 years old at this point. And we were playing outside on a summer day. I think my grandfather was watching the Reds, who had a much better season that year than they're having this year. But we were outside when the skies turned dark. Thunder started to clap on the horizon. There was a storm coming, and the storm was getting closer and closer to the house. And Donnie kind of understood that I was a little bit apprehensive about storms at that age. And so Donnie tricked me into going outside and then proceeded to lock me outside the house as the storm was coming. So I couldn't get back inside. As the storm moved closer, I started freaking out a little bit, as you might imagine. I was crying, I was banging on the door. Grandpa was watching the Reds. He had no clue what was going on there. And I guess he never heard me. Finally, as the rain started to fall, the thunder got louder, Donnie let me back in the house. And from this point on, I developed a phobia, astrophobia, as it's called. It's the fear of lightning and thunder. And at the first sign of a thunderstorm, I'd lock myself in the bathroom, turn the water faucet on as loud as it would go so I couldn't hear the thunder. And that would help me out a little bit, as long as I didn't hear it. But this fear eventually turned into a curiosity. You know, what made the lightning happen? What made the thunder happen? How did it all work? My young brain at that point just couldn't soak up enough information about this. And a funny thing happened after that. The more I learned, the less I was afraid. I have parents that come to me all the time saying their children have astrophobia or just fear of bad weather in general. And I say, well, get them some weather books, teach them about weather. The more they know about it, the less they're going to be afraid. And that's how it happened for me. My parents and grandparents bought me all kinds of weather books. And the more I learned, the less I was afraid. So at the ripe old age of 8, I decided that I was going to be a meteorologist someday. But I didn't want to be a TV meteorologist. Back then on TV, you had a bunch of actors and people that really didn't know science too well. I wanted to be a meteorologist that worked for the National Weather Service. So this is another lesson I learned. And this is just the very first example of many that I can remember in my life. Our trials and tribulations shape us. They shape us into who we are today. Failures and setbacks are preparing us for later success. This is something I tell my kids all the time. You're going to make mistakes. I'm going to let you make mistakes because I want you to learn through that. So what if my cousin Donnie hadn't done that, hadn't locked me out that day? You know, what if that hadn't happened at all? I may have not gone down the path that I ultimately went down here. So in some ways, I owe my entire career to my cousin Donnie, who still lives out in Claremont County. He works for Senco out there. He's heard this story. He's heard me tell this story many times, and he claims that I owe him commission on my earnings for all this as a meteorologist. I tell him that he owes me money for therapy after all that. But it was certainly one of those moments in my life that really set me down a path. So how does one become a meteorologist? Okay, that was the question on my young mind. I knew I had to go to college, get an education, but no one in my immediate family had gone to college. Could I even do it? Well, I wasn't exactly, I wasn't sure who told me this at the time, but as a kid, I held the firm belief that here in this country, anything's possible. If you want to do something or be someone, all you have to do is work hard and never give up. And I still maintain that today. Now, as an adult, I know that it's not quite that simple. And sometimes now I know that being naive is sometimes bliss. In reality here, I wanted to be the first National Weather Service meteorologist that would also simultaneously play for the Reds and Bengals. But the reality was I had to focus on just one of those things at the time. So that brings me to the next lesson I learned. And I still hold the firm belief that this is the greatest country in the world, and the opportunities that folks in this country have are unparalleled. And it's one of the true places where you have a chance to be what you want to be and do what you want to do. So it was with this firm belief that I set out to reach my goal of becoming a meteorologist someday. But this path would not be straight and narrow. There would be many different things which prepared me for what I do today. So another lesson I learned along the way is you have to get out of your comfort zone. Again, something I tell my children all the time. If you're nervous or uncomfortable about something new you got to do, that's not a bad thing. When I was a freshman in high school, I worked at Beachmont Roll Arena. Still exists out there on 125 in Claremont County. This was my first real job. And one day, the DJ was sick, couldn't come in. So the manager asked me to talk on the microphone and play music that day. I didn't want to. I was terrified. I was a really shy kid. I didn't like to talk in front of groups. I was one of those kids that could not go up and talk in front of the class successfully at all. It was a struggle. So to get up in front of these people and talk on a microphone and say the things I needed to say was just terrifying for me. But I reluctantly did. And I felt sick to my stomach the whole time. But they asked me to do it again and again and again. And a funny thing happened. As I continued to do this over and over, I gained some confidence. I started getting much better at it. And then I actually enjoyed it. And I did this for 4 years, the entire time I was in high school. Welcome to the Place to Skate in the Tri-State. I'm John. I'll be your DJ tonight. We're going to slow things down right now and make this a moonlight skate for couples and backward skaters. If you'd like to skate forward and by yourself, that's fine. Just do so slowly and carefully, please. That was one of my deals, you know. And I had to do all the rules, you know. Please don't set shoes on the table. Use the lockers in the back. They cost a quarter. You know, all those things that you have to do. But through that experience, seeds were planted for what I ultimately do today. And at the time, obviously, I didn't even know that. Lesson 5 here, and this is a big one, have a vision, have a goal, and take constant small steps to make that goal a reality. In my young mind, I knew if I wanted to be a meteorologist someday, I had to go to college. I knew the first step to doing that was to do as good as I could in school. The thought of how to finance it didn't even cross my mind, but eventually that would become a big problem. Now, I applied to many schools my senior year of high school. I received an incredible scholarship offer from Xavier, which made it affordable. Needless to say, my parents thought Xavier was like the Harvard of Cincinnati, and they were pushing me to go there hard. Problem was, X didn't offer atmospheric sciences or meteorology. The other schools I had applied to and were accepted to were larger out-of-state schools, and they didn't really offer me much in the way of scholarship or grant money at this point. They expected my parents to bring a good portion of that money. There are no schools in Cincinnati, in fact, that offer meteorology or atmospheric sciences as a major to this day. And so these other schools, bottom line was, I just couldn't afford them. After visiting many of these schools, I started to focus on a small school in northern Indiana, Valparaiso University. They call it Valpo for short. I had never heard of this school, but it was an expensive, very expensive private Lutheran school. And initially, like all the others, they expected my parents to bring a lot of money to the table in order to allow me to go here. But that wasn't going to be possible. So I called them asked for the financial aid department there at the time. And again, I don't think I'd even turned 18 at this point. And I basically told them, hey, I want to come to school there. Xavier has offered me this great package where it's making me pay little for tuition there, and you guys aren't offering me much of anything. And so they said, well, can you fax us over that offer that Xavier sent you? Sure. So I had to go down to mailboxes, et cetera, and fax it over, but I faxed it to them. And to my surprise, they not only matched X's offer to me, they exceeded it. So that kind of opened the door right there. Again, set a goal, take small steps, overcome challenges. When I was at Valpo, I used my experience as a DJ in high school to work at the university radio station. I had a show in a coveted time slot, midnight to 2 a.m. Sunday morning. Great time slot. No one listened at all. I would try to give away free tickets and things, and no one would call, but that was okay. I was being set up for the next step in my path. One night, I was working my radio show, and this group of older people came in. They're probably in their 30s at this point, and it was homecoming weekend. And one gentleman introduced himself, told me he used to work at the radio station. Asked him what he was doing now. He said, I'm a TV meteorologist. And I was so excited. I'm like, well, that's my major here at school. That is so cool. Where do you work? He's like, well, I'm the new chief meteorologist at WKRC Channel 19 in Cincinnati. This is a guy named Rich Apuzzo that you might remember, who was the longtime chief meteorologist here. When he found out that I was from Cincinnati, he said, listen, you've got to come do an internship with me one summer. This summer, next summer, I don't care. Come do an internship. I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do TV. I want to work for the National Weather Service. I need to go to a TV internship. But he promised, listen, it's going to be a great experience. Come do it. Even if you work for the Weather Service, you need to know what the TV side is like, because they're ultimately your customers in many ways. So that brings me to lesson number 6. Be willing to take risks. Okay, I finally agreed to do that internship with Rich. And much to my surprise, again, I loved every minute of it. I worked for over 40 hours a week back in the summer of '95, forecasting, making graphics, doing whatever they asked of me. And it was cool because his love of weather was unmatched, and he got me really excited about beginning a position with the National Weather Service. But again, seldom do things go as planned. In my final 2 years of school, there was a hiring freeze in the government. Brilliant students who were graduating ahead of me, brilliant students, much smarter than me, could not get jobs with the National Weather Service and the federal government. So I needed to pivot, and pivot quickly in this case. So lesson number 7, be flexible. Rich suggested I come back to the station, make a recording of myself doing weather in front of the green screen. Actually, it was blue then at this particular station. And I had never done this before. We didn't have that technology at school. We didn't have any type of broadcast studio for weather. We had a basic broadcast news studio, but that was about it. He was pretty sure that I could do well enough and land an entry-level job in TV. I really wasn't convinced that I wanted to do this at all. But I agreed to come back. I needed a suit. So my mom got me a really cheap one that fit poorly. The sleeves were a little too long. I think they came to about here. It's one of those situations where it just didn't look good. And then my mom, knowing so much about the world that she knew, she said, you need makeup if you're going to be on TV. See, mom had all boys. She always wanted a girl. So I think she relished in this whole thing. So she ran up to Walgreens and got me some makeup, and she put it on me ever so carefully. And I was in my suit that didn't fit. And I headed off to WXIX to make this recording. And now in WXIX, they have what they call a working newsroom. The newsroom and the studio are one and the same. So while I'm doing this, there's about I don't know, 40 people in there that are watching me try to do this. They're all talking, there's noise, it's a little intimidating to say the least. I'm sure a few of them were kind of laughing at me on the side. So then I recorded it, did my thing. And when I took a look at the recording with the anchor at the time, Jack Atherton, in the edit bay, he said, let's take a look at this and see how you did. When we popped it up, I was really upset at the way it looked because the makeup mom got me didn't work so well with the studio lighting. I looked like the Grim Reaper. I looked like I had been embalmed or something. I mean, it was like white as a ghost. It wasn't good. But again, there was a plan here. I sent this recording off to a few stations, and one guy called me back. His name was Ken Gullett. He was the news director of the CBS affiliate in Rock Island, Illinois. He said, hi, John, got your tape. And I was in my dorm room when I received this call. He said, it's actually really, really bad. Where's this going to go? Honesty, right? He's like, I've convinced my boss that you've got potential. I think you'll get better quickly. He's like, I used to be a producer at Channel 5 in Cincinnati for Jerry Springer and Norma Rashid. And my ex-wife and kids are there in Cincinnati. I see you're from Cincinnati. I just got a good feeling about you. So I'm going to offer you this job over the phone. He's like, and plus, I've offered it to 6 other people and no one will take it because it pays so little. Sign me up. So that was my first job in television. That paid $18,000 a year at the time. I had a friend who started for $14,000 a year in TV. So I was making the big bucks. My first weekend on the air, I had 3 tornadoes touch down in my viewing area. That was a tough situation to handle, being so young and inexperienced. Spent a couple of years there, went to my next job in New Bern, North Carolina. My first hurricane season there, we were hit by 3 hurricanes. One of them hit us twice. I had never been in a hurricane before. The only thing I knew was what I learned from books. So that was the first time. One of those hurricanes was Hurricane Floyd. And to this date, Floyd remains the largest natural disaster in North Carolina history. Entire sections of the state were flooded there with Floyd. It was a tough one to cover, really exhausting. But that was preparing me for what was to come in New Orleans. Now, back to that phone call. I'm going to the hospital. I think I'm in labor. Those aren't exactly the words you want to hear when you're sitting in the middle of what will likely be the biggest work assignment of your life. But they were the words my wife spoke, so I had to deal with it. Talk about pressure. Thankfully, earlier that day, I had helped make arrangements for a buddy of mine who was a meteorologist at our sister station in Charlotte, North Carolina, to fly in to come help us out. Brad Panovich is his name. He's an Ohio guy from Akron, the Ohio State University graduate. I actually took his job in New Orleans when he went to Charlotte, and we had hung out at many weather conferences together over the years and got to know each other. So when I received that call from my wife, I at least knew we would have him around later in order to help us out. Went down, told my boss what was going on without hesitation. She's like, family first, you got to get to the hospital. But before that could happen, I had to deliver the brand new forecast track and details of the storm to my customers at 10 o'clock at night. Now, word had spread around the station quickly about my wife being in labor, and the news anchors were tossing to me to give me the latest so I could give people the latest on the storm. And they made a little reference, a crosstalk reference, as we call it in the news business, to my wife being in labor. Now, my in-laws knew none of this was going on, but they were watching the internet stream from Indiana. And that's how they found out their grandson was on the way. So all this was going on. How did I keep it together? How did I stay composed? You know, you hear those stories about professional athletes who are just playing great. When they're interviewed, they often say the game just slows down for them. They stay calm and can see everything clearly. That's exactly what was happening to me. Everything kind of slowed down. and I kind of took it one problem at a time. I delivered the new forecast track as calm as could be. When I was done, I got a phone call from Brad. He had just landed at the airport and was going to be at the station the next 30 minutes. So I left. My son was born at 3:20 a.m. Sunday, August 28, 2005, just a little over 24 hours before Hurricane Katrina would make landfall. We evacuated by car when he was just 16 hours old. I was awake for 40 hours straight at that point. I ended up changing my very first diaper ever in the back of an SUV at a BP station in Laurel, Mississippi. Remember that vividly to this day. We would make it to my sister-in-law's apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, early the next afternoon. Now, our rental house didn't suffer extensive damage from the fallen trees. We're lucky. About 80% of the people I work with, they lost everything in the floods that followed the storm. Even though these people knew their homes were gone, they kept working. And our team would ultimately win a Peabody Award for our coverage in New Orleans. I was just a tiny part of that at the beginning, but they did amazing after that. Poorly designed flood walls was the reason the city had flooded. If you know anything about engineering, you know soil strength and the way the soil is really determines how far those pilings need to be shoved down in order to maintain the structure. Well, those pilings were only halfway down to the whole point that they needed to be. So basically those flood walls failed, everything flooded, and it was a total mess. Now, clearly you guys know the importance of networking because you're here today, and that's lesson number 8. Networking is so incredibly important. I attended weather conferences and began to network with my colleagues from across the country. That's where I met Brad. And I met another guy, his name was Jude Redfield. He was a CovCap graduate, worked at Channel 12. He heard what happened and heard about the storm, heard about me evacuating. Ultimately, I quit my job there in New Orleans, asked to be let out of my contract, which was on the #1 local morning newscast in the country at the time. And they let me out. So Jude had called me up and said, hey, I heard what happened. I want to let you know I'm going to Indianapolis. My job in Cincinnati is going to be open. So call them up. Maybe they'll be gullible enough to hire you. They were. I started my job at Local 12 in October of 2005. That's when I moved to Boone County. When I made a few appearances on TV, I started getting letters, phone calls, emails from people that found out where I was, and they were incredibly happy that they had found me, and they thanked me for helping them to understand the scope of the situation and convincing them to leave the city. And that was a great feeling. That's the best feeling I can get in my job, is knowing that I've helped people along the way. Usually the only feedback we get is negative feedback. So that was great feedback. That correspondence really led me to discover something that I had totally forgotten about, and something that Pastor Blair alluded to as he was introducing me. When I was packing up my things in New Orleans to move here to Boone County, I came across an old notebook that I had in school. And we were given an assignment to write each and every day about something. On this particular day, the teacher said, what is your greatest dream in life? And I wrote, my greatest dream in life is to become a meteorologist and help to save millions of people from a horrible hurricane. And so that's why I so strongly believe that we live in a country with unparalleled opportunities here. That if a first-generation college student like me from the east side of Cincinnati, whose parents were not wealthy, could become a meteorologist, could do what he wanted to do, could achieve this dream, then I tell kids all the time, listen, you can do it too. May not go the way you planned. God always has a different plan than what we think, but it is indeed possible. Which brings me to my final lesson here today. And you guys, I'm preaching to the choir on this, but give back, help others, donate just a little bit of your time, your money, your wisdom, your advice to helping others. It's going to come back to you tenfold. The people who are most successful are often the most active members of the community, and they do what they can to improve their community and the lives of those around them. It doesn't take much to encourage a child perhaps a child like I was, and let him or her know they have value and can achieve their dreams if they work hard and never give up. I had those people in my life along the way. That's one of the reasons that I was able to achieve what I did today. I know it went a little long. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for having me out today, guys. Ticket 112, you are the winner.